November 1982. Fear cloaks the serenity of a small town in New Jersey. Popular teenager Amy Hoffman has disappeared without a trace. The police can't say if she's alive or dead, but psychic Nancy Weber knows there's been a murder and fears the killer is on a rampage.
He's killed before, he's killing again. He's going to kill more.
She tells me something, I believe it to be gospel.
Can Nancy help catch the killer before his brutality is unleashed again? Three people out for a pleasant afternoon stroll, or so it seems. A closer look, and it becomes apparent this is not a recreational time filler. These people are not so ordinary. The conversation underscores the seriousness of their purpose.
She's screaming for her life and begging mercy.
Right when she was first found, there was no evidence that would indicate a...
Bill Hughes is a police officer, Nancy Weber is a professional psychic, and Jimmy Moore is retired. He was detective captain at the Parsippany Police Department. More than 20 years ago, the trio came together and stood in this secluded location. What happened here would change their lives forever. November 23rd, 1982. Amy Hoffman, an 18-year-old senior high school student, leaves her part-time job at a Morris County shopping mall. In the parking lot, she says goodnight to her friend. It's approximately 9:35 p.m. Two people see Amy as she walks across the back lot to where her car is parked. One, a fellow worker driving out of the parking lot. The other, her killer.
Well, her vehicle was found in the parking lot, not too far away from the store that she worked in. And the door was open on the car, and there was a witness, and she noticed a white male, in a green Chevrolet that was parked a couple spots away from where Amy's car was. And he was just sitting there in the car at that time.
It's Thanksgiving, 2 days since Amy Hoffman was last seen alive. Morris County, New Jersey comprises several small townships. Police departments from across the region become involved in the search for Amy.
It had a major impact on the community. Women were hesitant about going out on their own, especially at night.
20 miles away in Mount Olive, Nancy Weber, who runs her own psychic practice, gets a phone call from a woman.
She said, my daughter has a best friend who works at the Morris County Mall. And she's missing. She didn't come home. And that's when the vision popped up. The image I kept having was this naked body, multiple wounds all over. She was lying in water, raped. She had been terribly, terribly violated before she was murdered. And so I just went right into saying to her, I am sorry. I really can't discuss this with you. You call Amy's parents, or you call the police that are involved.
That same day, Amy Hoffman's body was found in a retention tank at the reservoir in Randolph.
There was a couple walking their dog through the woods, and it's an isolated area. It's like a lover's lane area. And they came across the body floating in the water. There was numerous slashes and stab wounds to her body. And some were post-mortem, meaning that after she had died, the assailant still continued to slash at her and cut her body. It was pretty gruesome.
Nancy's vision of the dead young woman was accurate. Bill Hughes, a detective with the Mount Olive Police Department, happened to drop by Nancy's house.
Most of the police officers in Mount Olive Township knew Nancy because she was just a friend of a lot of guys on the force, her and her family. And I just stopped by Nancy's house, just for a cup of coffee.
By the way, I read the newspaper account of Amy Hoffman. Why are they lying? She was raped. She wasn't not sexually abused. She was mutilated, not no wounds obvious.
The investigators at the time did not believe that sexual assault had occurred, but Nancy said that it had, that the girl had been sexually assaulted. There was no way of knowing because there was no physical evidence that you could see at the scene, according to the investigators, to indicate any type of sexual contact. What we found out later on was, yes, she indeed had been sexually assaulted by the suspect, and that was the result of forensics taken by the medical examiner's office.
I didn't say anything to Bill about wanting to be involved at all. It's one of the things I don't ever do. I wait to be asked. When it comes to this kind of work, it's very important, I believe, for all concerned, including the victim, to know that I am the appropriate person to participate. It's an ingredient. I'm one of the ingredients or not. So I don't ask to help.
Maybe to a lesser extent today, but at that time, psychics were certainly not taken seriously. They probably were looked at as people trying to make a name for themselves, people that would take advantage of the weak. I was a small player in this investigation. I'm on the periphery, so I really had no authority. I had to find somebody that was very open-minded, kind of like myself. You know, I'll try anything once, believe anything once until it's proven wrong.
Detective Bill Hughes has faith in Nancy's psychic powers, and she has a real concern that the killer will strike again.
He's killed before, he's killing again, he's going to kill more.
November 1982, Morris County, New Jersey. 18-year-old student Amy Hoffman goes missing. 2 days later, her mutilated body is discovered in a water retention tank. Police from all across the region are hunting down a brutal killer. On the same day Amy's body is discovered, psychic Nancy Weber has a vision of the crime scene. She knows that the young woman has been sexually assaulted and murdered even before police. Now she suspects the killer will strike again. She's right.
The second victim was a girl named Dedra O'Brien, who worked in a local restaurant and was heading home early in the morning. It was after midnight. She was forced off the road and abducted from her vehicle, and later brought to a rest stop on Route 80 in Warren Township, where she was murdered. We were all very upset because now we had two gruesome homicides on our hands, and we had a feeling that the same individual was involved because the same type vehicle was seen leaving the scene of Dedra O'Brien's homicide.
A second woman dead in such a short time leaves little doubt that police are dealing with a serial killer. But this time, the killer leaves a calling card: tire prints. Detective Bill Hughes thinks it's crucial to get Nancy officially involved in the case. But he is just one of hundreds of police officers tracking down what they now suspect is a serial killer. He needs to get someone he can trust to hear her out.
I knew that Jimmy Moore is a seasoned veteran. Jimmy has well over 20 years on the police force at the time. He's a captain. He's in charge of the detectives in Parsippany. He's more directly involved in the case because Amy Hoffman is from Parsippany. So I knew that if I could talk to Jim, then I might be able to get them to use Nancy to do some investigative leads on the case or to give us some direction to go in the case.
I had never used a psychic, and I was a little skeptical. I really didn't believe too much into them. Is it possible? I mean, can somebody truly do this? I actually had flashbacks of being on the boardwalk and down at the Jersey Shore, and you see these signs, palm readings, and of course I don't believe in any of that. So I was a little skeptical, but I said, you know what? We have nothing really to go with. If there's a chance that it's going to solve the case, I'm willing to try it.
When I opened the door to Bill at 6'5", standing next to this about 5'7" man who he introduces as Captain Jimmy Moore from Homicide, I thought, uh-oh, what now? And he simply asked me to repeat to Jimmy what I had told him about the newspaper account of Amy Hoffman and my belief that there was a discrepancy there.
I asked Nancy some questions and stuff like that, and pretty much wanted to get to know her as an individual. And I found out that she was just down-to-earth type of individual, and she didn't seem to be a person that exaggerates or puts anything on. And I was impressed by her personality. And I said, "How do you do this?" And she says, I just see it. And she says, "I don't know why or how, but I just see things." And she says, "All I can do is tell you what I see." And she says, "I don't want you to tell me anything about the case, and I don't want you to give me any leads."
What we decided to do at that point was take a ride in my car. And what we were going to do is take Nancy, by the scenes of the abduction, and the scenes of the murder, and the scenes where their bodies were left.
When I was driving with Bill and Jimmy in the car the first day, when we went down a road, I could feel I was coming towards the end of her life. It was as if the energy of the road itself got darker and darker. Got more magnetically charged with an energy that felt more panicky, heightened anxiety.
The first place that we went to was the reservoir in Randolph. We took Nancy down there and parked the cars, and we let Nancy walk around. It was an eerie feeling. You know, it was a very isolated area, wooded area, no homes around. Very macabre. You could almost feel the horror that Amy would have gone through. Amy could have been dumped in any one of about 12 acres. And Nancy went right to the spot where Amy was left.
I felt almost as if Amy was waiting for me there on the ground. So I got down on the ground on my knees, and I could feel no separation between the memory of what Amy went through and myself at that point. I began to speak words I believed were the last words, where she was begging, "Please don't kill me." I believe she knew that that's what he was about by then. She had already been raped. She had already been badly cut. And I believe she understood that he was enjoying this. And she didn't know how to get through to him. She had no idea how to get through to this person who seemed bent on destroying her. For me, it was very important to stay with it because I'm looking for the tiniest bit of a clue, a shred of evidence that might stop him. Went back in the car and kept reviewing. Now I'm going over all the film. Again and again, like an editor, attempting to be as detailed as possible. Pop. He's from Polish descent. He grew up in Morristown. Pop. He was in Florida. He was in jail there for murder. And I'm telling Jimmy and Bill as I get it, in the car, driving. They let him out. Early parole? Pop. His name kept coming to me, the man who was with her. James. I don't know if she knew his name. I knew it. So when I got the last name beginning with a K and Koedatich.
I felt that Nancy was seeing what we were looking for. She had this individual pegged, and she was trying as hard as she could to give us as much evidence that she could see to arrest him, because she kept telling me, "Jim says this guy is sick, and he's just going to keep killing until he's caught." And she was upset with that. She was very adamant about telling me that this was a sick individual and he's just going to keep on killing.
It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't he stalked this particular person for weeks and had an obsession with her. He had an obsession with joy at causing harm. When I saw that, I knew he's not going to stop until somebody stops him. This man will not stop.
With 2 brutal murders occurring within 10 days, every available police officer in Morris County is on the case. Most are following procedure, the routine that is police work. 2 are following a totally different line of inquiry. Detectives Jimmy Moore and Bill Hughes have teamed up with psychic Nancy Weber in their own private investigation. They've been able to get quite a bit of information from Nancy about the first murder. Now they want to know what she can tell them about the second.
After the Dedra O'Brien homicide, I picked up Nancy and we drove to the rest area where the crime had taken place.
She took us right to the spot where the suspect had parked with Dedra. She described the encounter there.
And I see this truck in my mind. And I see a trucker, and I see this woman coming out of a speeding car. She's naked. She's knifed. And I'm looking at the car, and I'm looking at... It's the same car. It's James. I know it.
The only thing that stopped him from continuing with his attempt to sexually assault her was the fact that there was a truck parked in the rest area a little ahead of them.
Nancy felt that the assailant had just had enough and didn't want to be bothered with her anymore, so he stabbed her and threw her out of the car and then drove off. And that's when Dedra had enough strength to pick herself up and go to the truck to knock on the door, getting help from the truck driver.
The truck driver got on the CB radio and radioed for help, and troopers eventually got there, but unfortunately, Dedra passed away in the arms of the truck driver.
I was impressed with Nancy when I took her to the truck stop because everything that she was telling me was exactly what had happened, as much as we knew from the evidence and from the truck driver's statement.
She's telling us stuff that there's no way Nancy could have known because this is, you know, in the investigative files. This is not stuff that's being released to the press. And yet, Nancy knows what happened.
Over the next few days, Nancy keeps replaying the visions over in her head.
Every time I would go back to James, I would get another tiny little piece. He was at least about 5'10", slim, very narrow, thin, long nose, dark eyes. And I'd spend hours on it. I would be reviewing it, kind of like 18-hour days of review editing. Then I'd go back some more, and I'd feel the car, his brother, gas station. Brother owns it, works it. That's where he got the car, from his brother at a gas station. They're local. They're Wharton, they're Morristown, they're local. They all know who he is. Everybody knows who he is. They'll know his last name. He was a local terror. Growing up even, the cops all know who he is. He's not an unfamiliar character. This guy was dangerous when he was in high school.
Nancy's coming up with all this stuff that she couldn't have possibly known about, and she's giving us all this good information. And then a little bit of frustration sets in because you believe what she's saying, and now you're trying to think to yourself, how am I going to convince the bosses in Morris County to listen to what she has to say?
At this stage, the detectives want permission from the county prosecutor to officially involve Nancy in the investigation, but before they can present their case, they are denied access to his office. The prosecutor is not interested.
As Nancy and I started to walk through the door, a detective from the prosecutor's office stopped me, and who knew me personally. And he said, "Jim, what's she doing here?" I said, "Well, she's been with us and given us information on the case." And he said, "Well, the prosecutor doesn't want her here. He doesn't want to get involved with her." I was upset with the prosecutor for not even hearing us out. I felt that he should have at least listened to what we had to say. And it bothered me. To this day, it bothers me why he did that.
The headlines were all over not only our state, but the nation and on all the news, that we had a serial killer. Nobody knew who it was. They couldn't figure it out.
Nancy is also upset and frustrated. she decides to appeal to a higher authority. She calls some students who she trusts, and they form a psychic circle. Together, they use psychic prayer to try and stop the killer in his tracks.
Went through everything. And when I was finished, I told them, join hands with me. So we went to the light, went to the Godhead, went to the apex, and through that, asked that if it was in the spiritual path of all concerned, to bring back to James Koedatich the pain he has given and the suffering he has caused. Let him feel it now. Let him get it in such a manner he can no longer give it. And I simply held on to that thought the rest of the night. It was my mantra. It was my chant. It is his time. Let him feel his own pain. He cannot give it out any longer. Let him feel his own pain. He cannot give it out any longer. It is over.
The power of divine intervention has been argued and disputed since time began. Can a New Jersey psychic's prayer really stop the killer in his tracks? In fact, there's been a dramatic break in the case overnight.
I get a call home, and I was told that an individual was arrested in response to the Amy Hoffman, Dedra O'Brien murders. They responded to a home in Morristown where an individual had been stabbed. While they were at the scene, one of the officers noticed the green Chevrolet sitting in the driveway, and it matched the description of the vehicle we were looking for. So they called for the forensic team to come to the scene to check this vehicle out. As it turned out, they found the tire on the car matched the imprint that was found at Dedra O'Brien's abduction. And subsequently, the individual was arrested and charged with the 2 homicides. When I found out who the individual was and his background, I couldn't believe how accurate Nancy's information was that she had given us.
So we have our guy under arrest, James Koedatich, and what we find out about James is very interesting. A lot of the stuff that Nancy had told us was right on the money. James Koedatich had a brother who was a mechanic, had lived pretty much his entire life in Morris County. James had moved to Florida, had been in prison in Florida, and that he'd murdered while he was in prison in Florida, stuff that Nancy had come up with. His last name was Koedatich, the K and the ITCH that Nancy had come up with.
Early in the morning, I get a call from Jimmy. And he goes, hey, Nancy, what did you do? I said, what do you mean, what did I do? He said, what did you do? I said, I had class last night. And I told them about it. And we said a prayer to finish it. Make this man have all the pain he gave to women. He said, well, James Koedatich. And as he said the words and the name, it was like, boom, 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 lights go on. I went, that's him.
All the information that she saw, that she gave us, was exactly the truth.
I think that a lot of people have to see for themselves. You know, there's going to be people that are going to watch this episode and they're going to see me and they're going to listen to me talk. They're going to listen to Jimmy Moore talk. They're going to listen to different people talking about their experiences with psychics, and they're just not going to buy it. And so be it. But if you're a police officer and you don't buy it, then you probably shouldn't be in the investigative side of anything. I says, because like I said before, you've got to keep an open mind. You've got to be willing to try anything. If you try it and you don't like it and it doesn't work out for you, so be it. Then don't try it again if you don't want to, but at least try it once.
But there is still a mystery surrounding the event of James Koedatich's arrest. Police arrived at his house after he called them complaining he'd been stabbed. Could Nancy's prayer have anything to do with this?
He claimed that a dark-haired woman ran him off the road and knifed him in the back. And at the time, my hair wasn't gray, and it was longish. And I thought, I wonder if he'd recognize me if he met me. I'd love it. I'd love him to know that, you know, you stand there with all the victims. And that victims have power, you fool. How could you do this?
It's up to you to decide whether she had anything to do with it or not.
On October 29, 1984, James Koedatich became the first man sentenced to die under New Jersey's revised capital punishment statute. The sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. After his arrest, it was determined that Koedatich had actually stabbed himself. He never explained why, although the self-inflicted wounds were not life-threatening, and apparently he never again spoke of the long-haired woman he claimed had attacked him. But perhaps he sees her now and then. January 2003, a psychic has a vision of a violent murder in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
I felt terrified.
She sees the killer's face.
He had black hair, he had brown eyes, he had a very round, full face.
But her description is ignored by the police. A serial killer is on the loose. More women could die if no one listens. In May 2002, Murray Pace, a 22-year-old graduate assistant at Louisiana State University, leaves work early to attend a friend's wedding. 2 hours later, her roommate returns to the apartment to find her brutally murdered. In the following weeks, 3 more women are attacked. The Baton Rouge police then announced that DNA evidence links Murray Pace's murder to that of 2 other women. They are now dealing with a vicious serial killer, who might also be behind the savage rape and murder of a number of other women in the area since 1990. The town is gripped by fear.
It was panic. You had ladies asking for self-defense courses. You had a major sale in pepper spray. People were worried about their daughters.
To catch the killer, the Baton Rouge Police Department sets up a task force together with the FBI and other local forces. Detective McDavid with the Zachary Police suggests as prime suspect a local peeping Tom who's been causing trouble for years.
Evidently, we put so much pressure on him that he began moving into the Baton Rouge area.
Unfortunately, he doesn't match the serial killer profile used by the FBI.
The majority of the profiles that we were getting from the FBI at the time were generic. Pretty much a white male in his mid-30s that lives at home, lives with his mother, or a loner.
The Zachary suspect is ignored. The FBI have witnesses to back up their profile. One reports a white male driving a pickup truck with a naked female slumped on the passenger seat. She looked dead. It was near the Whiskey Bay exit on Interstate 10, close to where the body of another victim had been found. Another witness sees a suspicious-looking white man near where a woman had been killed while visiting her mother's grave. She'd been beaten to death. By December 2002, the serial killer has taken 2 more women. A white man is seen near one of the bodies. The task force starts taking DNA samples of thousands of white males.
They were taking DNA samples from people that they thought may have had some connection in the neighborhood where the homicides occurred, or people that drove a white truck, or males that were in a certain age bracket.
At the end of December, the task force released their first composite sketch of the killer. He's a 25 to 35-year-old white male, apparently physically strong and awkward with women. But 6 months later, they still have no suspect. Ann Williams, a forensics consultant and former lawyer, teaches a college course in forensic investigation. She's worked on a number of cold cases and wants to help out on this one.
I knew there was talk of a serial killer. And I decided to call Jeanie Borgen, who has worked some cases with me as a police psychic. And I had contacted Murray's mother, Ann Pace, and gotten Murray's birth information, which is what Jeanie needs to work on these cases as a psychic.
Murray's mother decides to join Ann's forensics class.
She wanted to be there for Murray. She said that she was there when Murray was born, and she couldn't be there when it mattered most, when Murray died.
Ann Williams called me, and she told me she had a woman in her class by the name of Ann Pace, and that she had lost a daughter and that she had been murdered. I had Murray's birth certificate name and birth date, and I used that as a method of psychometry. In other words, I'm touching and I'm examining the name, and then I get the vision. I sort of ask for the vision mentally.
Anne often has forensics experts call in and talk to students on the speakerphone about cases they've worked on. So she sets up a conference call with Jean in California.
Well, we're all here to talk to you, my class.
The first thing that I saw was a house. Very neat house, a neat manicured lawn, very peaceful. I had seen him on a street corner looking at the apartment building. She didn't know him, but she had seen him. So he was familiar to her. She was not overwhelmed or frightened. He can be very personable. But suddenly he got very violent, and he attacked. This girl fought back. For every blow she got, she gave him one. But he had a knife. And it was a brutal fight. And I was stuck in the picture. I couldn't get out. I knew that the final moments that she had to die with something of the throat. And he did. He did cut her throat. I felt terrified. It was like Murray and I were one at that point. I had to sit there and watch her die. It was really hard. As it ended, he straightened up and he looked at me. And it was like I was looking eye to eye with him. I started shaking inside, and then I had little butterflies, and then he disappeared. When I looked at him, I thought he was probably about 5'10" to 6 feet. He was Afro-American. He had black hair, he had brown eyes, he had a very round, full face, and then he had this little goatee. He had a mustache, but then there was other times that I picked him up, he did not have a mustache.
Someone in the class asked her, well, what's he wearing, this Baton Rouge serial killer? She said, well, right now, she says, I'm seeing him in blue Dickies. And I said, well, what are Dickies? I mean, I didn't even know. And the class laughed, and they said, those are work pants, you know.
With Murray's mother verifying the known details of the murder, the class are stunned by the realism of the psychic's vision. But Ann Williams is uneasy.
When Jean first described the serial killer as being a light-complected black man, I just thought she was off. I didn't believe it. Because, you know, statistically, he would be a white man, and that's what they said they were looking for.
Can Ann's investigation be of any help to the task force if Jeannie's vision is so off on such a key point? January 2003. Baton Rouge is being terrorized by a serial killer. A task force is set up to catch him. They believe he's a white man and take DNA samples of over 2,000 men. But 6 months later, they still have no suspect. Forensics consultant Ann Williams wants to help. She involves her friend, psychic Jeanie Borgen, who has a stark vision of the murder of one of the killer's victims. But in her vision, the killer is a light-skinned African American. Anne thinks she's wrong.
Ann was right. You don't positively make a statement about a suspect until you're absolutely certain.
But Anne has worked with Jeanie before, and the psychic's accurate description of the murder persuades her not to give up too easily. Over the following months, Jeanie has constant visions of the killer.
I was tuning in on him every night. He was in the car a lot.
She sees him at Whiskey Bay off Interstate 10, where the bodies of 2 earlier victims were found. Jeanie is convinced there are more. With her friend, Chip Bowman, Ann Williams tries to find the places Jeanie sees in her visions. If they find another body, it might lead them to the killer. They photograph likely locations and send her the pictures.
Well, I think probably if we take pictures anywhere around here, it'll be helpful to Jeanie, because who knows where he would have dumped somebody. Then we could go back the opposite end, where Pam Kennemore's body was found, to that north area, that wooded area that Jeanie's interested in, and take some shots of that.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Well, it's very, very hard because I have to have a fix. I have to see a certain tree, or I have to see something that looks like what I'm seeing.
Jeanie tries to guide them through the landscapes of her visions.
I can't believe this, Jeanie. We're actually seeing what you're telling us.
Listen, you need to go to your right. There's going to be a big line of trees there. Yeah, all right, now wait a minute. When he walked into the line of trees, there was like a culvert there and he tripped.
There is a dip in the ground, just like you said. I cannot believe this.
But finding a body in this vast wilderness requires a massive search, and time is running out. Jeanie begins to sense the killer's moods.
He really did not like women, especially women who were mentally above him, or he felt superior to him.
These women were basically the same. They were professional women. I mean, we had 2 homicides in Zachary, which is in the parish, that were fairly consistent with what was happening in Baton Rouge.
It was almost a hate sexual type of a situation.
Jeanie senses the killer is ready to strike again.
The energy had been building in him as he watched the person for maybe weeks.
He did a lot of surveillance, what we can tell, on these victims' houses. He knew their movements, knew when they come outside, he knew who was at the house.
And then when it got powerful in the body, he went for it. I knew that this was a man who had to kill.
As the killer's bloodlust becomes stronger, Jeanie has a terrible vision.
I thought I had another victim. And then suddenly I realized she's alive. And it was like, oh my God, she's alive. And she's gonna be one of the future victims. And then at that point, I thought, but where is she? Where do I go from here?
The killer is already stalking his next victim. As Jeanie tries desperately to see where the attack might happen, the landscape of her visions becomes more recognizable.
He stood one night looking out at the water, and I saw these beautiful white birds fly over the water. That was I think that was at the foot of Stanford Avenue.
2 of the killer's victims had lived on Stanford Avenue. Does his new victim also live here? With time running out, Anne and Chip scour the area.
The next thing I got was a house. It was a green house. It had 2 trees on both sides, like this, like a frame, and it had bushes in front. That had to be where she lived. But I couldn't quite figure out, I couldn't get anything that would give me a sign as to where it was at.
And then finally a breakthrough. Anne and Chip locate one of Jeanie's visions.
He went to this place that was sort of a little restaurant with a big television. When I got the picture of this little restaurant, it wasn't much, but I was overjoyed that they had found it, because I thought that he'd probably frequent that a lot.
But tragically, they are too late. On March 13, 2003, the body of 26-year-old Carrie Yoder is found at Whiskey Bay. Once again, the killer had been careful not to leave any fingerprints.
But he did leave one important evidence on the bodies. That was his DNA, which is similar to a fingerprint.
DNA evidence shows she's a victim of the same man who killed Murray Pace. The man the task force are convinced is white, but who appears in Jeannie's visions as a light-skinned African-American.
But as far as the description of this light-complected black man, I just didn't buy that. He's white. She's wrong.
Then, some days later, while talking to Murray's old roommate, Anne makes an extraordinary discovery.
She told me about some neighbors of Murray's who had seen a suspicious man standing across the street staring at Murray's townhouse the morning she was murdered. They each went to the police that day and gave their description. None of them knew the other had seen him, but the police weren't interested. They had a profile they were working from that this is a white man. So they just totally ignored credible witnesses that day.
So the neighbors posted their testimonies on a well-known website.
Said that this guy was a light-complected black man wearing blue dickies with a wannabe goatee. And I said, you gotta be kidding. I was trying to figure out, well, the police won't come do a sketch, so what can I do? So I wound up ordering some software that the police use.
Together with Karen Savoy, one of Murray's neighbors, Anne puts together a composite sketch of the man they saw watching Murray's house the day she was murdered.
I don't see anything there. Could we, go down? Let's try 812.
Wanna try it?
No, I don't think so. And
No.
rounded on this.
So it needs
on the
flatter?
tip. Yes.
Okay,
But
we'll keep going.
Not as broad as the one that I liked. I think
about-
it was 836.
What about that one?
Jeanie confirms this is the man she saw in her visions. Anne sends it to the task force.
Anne and I were talking constantly about what we could do to get the police to recognize that this was a black man, not a white man. But they just didn't seem to look at it as far as we knew.
Once we got these sketches and everything, I drafted a letter, and I put their verbal description of this guy, because that's the most important thing, and how to reach these witnesses, and that they really would like to speak with law enforcement and hopefully do a professional sketch. And I sent that, I overnighted it to Governor Foster, and then to the task force, and I didn't get any response from them.
But when she tried to produce the sketch to the task force, they turned it down. They didn't want to hear about it. It was a white male they were looking for.
Although the police agree that the witnesses all saw the same man, Anne is not allowed to release the sketch.
He said, well, you know, we already have a sketch. We don't want another sketch out there. You're not a professional sketch artist. I said, well, I know. I said, but who did your other sketch? You know, from Lafayette. He said, well, that was a professional sketch artist. I said, well, that sketch doesn't look like anybody on this planet.
A month later, in April 2003, police in nearby Zachary received fresh complaints about a peeping Tom in a neighborhood where two women were previously raped and murdered.
The neighbor across the street here called in and stated that a black male was standing at this window right here, peeping into this window. The lady that lived here was a school teacher. She was a single mom who had one child here. We saw several footprints here at the windowsill. We followed these prints, and they went around the corner right here and went down the fence line right here and took off in the neighborhood.
Zachary police think it's the same peeping Tom who some years earlier they suspected of a vicious attack on two teenagers with a machete at the local cemetery.
Two teenagers were parking in the graveyard here. It was a very stormy night, a lot of lightning going on. One of our officers came down the road right here and saw the dome light on in the car, knowing that nobody's supposed to be in the graveyard at that time of night. He come in here and stopped and got his flashlight out and checked and saw two teenagers in there covered in blood. And they began screaming. He called for help, stated a black male had came to them and began cutting them up with a big hack blade. He saw the police officer drive up. He reached back in the car and took a set of keys and fled the scene.
Working with the victims, police did a sketch of the attacker. It looks just like the Peeping Tom. His name is Derek Todd Lee. They suggested him to the task force, but they aren't interested in a black Peeping Tom. They believe the serial killer is white. If they won't listen to colleagues, reliable witnesses, or even an experienced psychic, how many more women will die before the killer is caught? A savage serial killer is preying on the town of Baton Rouge. The police are hunting a white man, but psychic Jeanie Borgen believes he's African American. And while Ann Williams and photographer Chip Bowman try to find the places she sees him in, the killer strikes again. Meanwhile, police in nearby Zachary think the killer could be a black Peeping Tom who's been plaguing their town for years. With fresh complaints of the Peeping Tom in their area, Zachary police now reopened the file of their main suspect, Derek Todd Lee. Apart from his Peeping Tom offenses, Lee has also been in jail for various burglaries and for beating his girlfriend.
We worked out a timeline, and we saw where he had a job, when he didn't have a job.
The timeline showed them something startling.
When he was in prison, we didn't have no murders. When he was out, we began having problems in the area.
Meanwhile, in Baton Rouge, the task force get lucky. There were witnesses to the abduction of Carrie Yoder. Police now release a second sketch of the serial killer and announced that he could in fact be of any race, not necessarily white. This is sweet music to McDavid's ears.
In the back of your mind, you want to go out and say, I told you so.
Was a likeness of a black male that was also similar to a sketch that was produced by Ann Williams.
Now psychic Jeanie Borgen has a terrifying premonition. The killer is about to strike again.
At this point, I knew he would kill if he had the chance.
But the clues are too vague. Ann Williams feels helpless to prevent it.
She says, well, I'm getting a woman missing in Alabama. And she said she's a pretty brunette. And I said, well, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about a woman in Alabama.
Then, Melinda McGee disappears from her home in Mobile, Alabama. Her body is never found. Finally, in May 2003, McDavid gets a court order to take a DNA swab from Derek Todd Lee.
My partner, Trevor Hanna, and me drove up there, and we found him out in the yard. He saw me get out the vehicle and began getting upset and told them to tell me to leave. He knew, that I was after him. In 1998, I interviewed Lee in the Mayberry murder. And after interviewing him, I looked him in his face, because he was real cocky. And I told him, so I know what you did. I'm going to get you one day.
The sample is sent to the crime lab to be analyzed. Lee now takes his 2 children out of school and leaves town. Some days later, the analyst at the DNA lab makes the discovery that seals Lee's fate. His DNA matches that of the serial killer. McDavid is called in to see the task force.
I walked in, everybody just, their eyes were on me. And I kind of glanced back and looked around, and I'm not for sure who said it. They come up to me and said, y'all just solved the serial killer. Y'all's DNA swab matched the serial killer. Oh, I was elated. I was excited. Tears came to my eyes.
The task force now officially identify the serial killer. It's Derek Todd Lee. Police track Lee to a cheap motel in Atlanta. The officers just miss him as they arrive. Following a tip-off, they finally arrest him outside a tire store.
The minute I heard his name, it was like, that's him. They got him. It was just pure elation.
On the 12th of October 2004, a jury takes just 80 minutes to find Derek Todd Lee guilty of the first-degree murder of Charlotte Murray Pace. He's also indicted for the murders of 6 other women.
This is the kind of case, these serial killings, where a psychic can be very helpful because you don't have a DNA database. And oftentimes, people are surprised to learn many police agencies are not well trained or well equipped to deal with these kinds of stranger killings.
This case was very difficult because it was like working on 15 cases rather than just one case. I got frustrated, so frustrated that I couldn't get on top of him fast enough to catch him.
It was a relief off my shoulders because since 1992 we've been battling these murders, and I made a commitment to myself before I retired I was going to solve these murders.
I would hope that the sketch we did maybe helped convince them that Derek Todd Lee was the man they were after. I hope so.
Lee is given the death penalty and is awaiting execution at Angola prison.
It was a victory for law enforcement. It was a victory for our city. In the town of Zachary, you know, people still leave their doors unlocked, you know, and not looking over their shoulders. And now they can still do that. They can go out and walk freely and not worry about that.